Hi, my name is Bernard Pucher, and welcome to CenterFrame's brand new show, Make It Short, where filmmakers can submit their work and get constructive feedback on it. And joining me is my co-host Diogo Bregman. He is from Brazil. He's a journalist and critic who regularly who regularly reports on film festivals from around the world, and he's also a regular contributor on CenterFrame and our blog. Welcome, Diogo. Thank you very much for putting this show together. This is great.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun discussing these short films.
Thanks, Diogo, for joining us. And also joining me is good old friend and super talented filmmaker, Petros Silvestros. I know it's weird hearing that, but it is completely true. Just to spout his credentials a little bit so he doesn't feel awkward. He won the Silver Bear at the Berlin Film Festival twice in a row, which hasn't been done before. And I think at the time you said it was the first British film to win the Silver Bear, right?
That's correct.
Right, well done.
That's not good for the British film industry, though, if it took them so long to get there. What was happening all that time?
Yeah, right? Yeah, there's lots of movies being made.
There were lots of very good British filmmakers, but yeah, I don't know, with a short film, what's happening.
And then twice in a row, well done. And those are scripts that you guys found through the UK Film Festival, right? Which you are the head of program for.
We found these films via the UK Film Festival, and it was actually during the first two script competitions we launched.
That's amazing. That's incredible.
And that was the idea of that competition, basically take scripts from emerging writers and put them on a big screen and make high-end short films. So we're very happy it was successful right from the first two seasons.
Amazing. Dude, well done. Really, really. So, Diogo, why don't you tell us what kind of films you have in store for us today, and what's the first one you've got for us?
Today we're going to talk about some sci-fi related films, but this first one that we're going to talk about, it's called Sky Fighter, which is one of the most, I would say, the most sci-fi of the short films we're going to be talking about today. It's directed by Lucas Candle, and it's one of those classic space sci-fi adventures, and it has a lot of tension. And what I really loved about this movie was the way that the director was able to build up the tension between the characters. Of course, there is a lot of creative and interesting visual effects as well, which I think that contribute a lot to the final product here. But I think one of the most engaging elements of this film is the tension. We don't know who we should believe in. We have two characters in a spaceship trying to we as the audience, we're trying to find out who's telling the truth. And it's really special, and it's very successful. It's got a lot of views on YouTube, so it's quite popular. And I think it's a must-see for all hardcore horror sci-fi fans.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the film as well. I thought the suspense was definitely sort of the best executed part of the film, and I thought that visually it was very ambitious and tried really hard to, communicate its world and its aesthetic. So I was wondering where from a directing standpoint you came from. What's the things that worked, and where you maybe think something didn't quite come across.
Well, I would say, first of all, as Diogo said quite rightly, I enjoyed the idea, the mood, the concept. It took me back, I think we were discussing this before, it took me back to some more old-fashioned science fiction films that I really like, such as Alien, for instance.
Yeah.
The production design reminded me that a lot, and the music, and also the performances, which I thought they were probably the stronger thing about this film, both especially the actress for the female character, Jess Gaber.
She was great.
She was really great, and that's a very difficult thing because in science fiction we're in a very artificial world, and we speak lines we don't speak every day.
Yeah,
and it's very difficult to get actors that can speak these lines really dramatically. The problems I had with it is that it's a short film and it's 15 minutes. I think it's 15 minutes.
15 minutes, right? Minutes. Something like that.
And it's, in terms of storyline, it's throwing a lot at me. It's a bit complicated. We're thrown into a battle we don't understand. They talk about invasion. We don't know who's invading whom. Fighting an enemy, implantation of memories. Father comes from the back, gives some guidance that's useful in the future. There's a lot going on for 15 minutes. And when you're in a sci-fi world, this is not a world you're related to. It's not everyday world. You need time to understand it. And by the time you're trying to understand all these things together, the plot is already advancing, and then you're left behind, and you're not fully with the characters to be fully able to understand and being on this same emotional journey with them.
Right.
And that's the problem I had with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much. You need too much for a short film.
Mm-hmm.
Plot, story needs to be simpler for the audience to engage and understand. Otherwise, it feels like a fragmented piece. It's a small piece from a feature film or from a TV series.
And maybe that was the ambition. So why don't we find out? Let's bring Lucas actually in on the call so we can talk to him and learn more about how he came up with the film and see if we can give him some sort of constructive feedback on the whole thing. All right, joining us now is Lucas Kendall. Thank you very much for submitting your film to Make It Short. We had really good fun watching it, and we appreciated sort of the aesthetic of it. But I want to sort of know from you what the inspiration was for the film and how you decided to go about telling the story.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's sort of a long story because I had a feature script that I wanted to direct. And I was lucky to get representation from a television project I was in. And I told the guys who wanted to sign me to get 10% of the TV money. I said I have this feature I'd like to direct, and they say, no problem, great, we're there with us. And I did, and then the very next meeting they say, you've never directed, nobody knows you, and how would you feel about making a proof of concept? And I'm like, guys, do I own a bank? And I totally understood their point because from the experiences I've had as a first-time director. But anyway, it just was clear to me that I needed to make the short film as a proof of concept to show that I could direct. And then it took like 2 years before I finally said, okay, to do this. And I was able to raise some money on INDIGO because I had a fan base from a magazine I used to publish about movie soundtracks.
Oh, nice.
So like I said, it's a long story, but it was a feature script, and then it was a short film, and then I've completely rewritten the feature probably four times because I learned that, and this was very disturbing to learn, but unfortunately I used to be an idiot.
You used to be what, sorry?
I used to be an idiot.
Oh. your feet just broke up there. I was like, did he really just say I used to be an idiot?
Yes. No, that's what I really said. I was a total fool. And the script that I thought was genius was in fact garbage. So it was lucky that I made a short that I think is as successful as it was. And then I've since rewritten the feature script because I got a huge education just making the short, working with real actors. So that's sort of the story. And,
nice. So how
as
would
you can see, I'm a veteran back on tour.
So how would you, what would you describe as the weakest points of the film? Like if you had to start somewhere and if you could change something over, what would it be?
Well, a dump on any of my things. I think if there were a few moments, actors where I didn't give them proper direction, had to cut around it. I don't want to say where that is. Shot over on a weekend, and it took me until like right before lunch to figure out how to direct, because I never took one lesson. And some of the early moment, everybody else, it was just this. That's okay. So here's what I learned. It's like you're the guest conductor of this symphony orchestra, and everybody knows how to play their instruments, and they're looking to you to tell them what to. Like, I don't know how to do this. So I was the dumbest person on the set. I had to gradually realize that, oh wait, I have this thing in my head, and I need to communicate to these people to do it. And I was going very softly the first morning. I didn't want to be taking up too much time if my direction was bad or unrealistic or impractical. But then gradually, as I was seeing what they were, as we got it on its feet, I was realizing, wait, this isn't what I want these performances to be. And so I kind of stepped in and said, no, no, I'm going to actually direct this. And it sort of threw everybody off because they wanted me to block shoot it. And there was no way to do that because there's so much performance to get right in every moment. So the question was like, what would I do? It would have been, I would have directed the way I really wanted from the clock the first morning as opposed to waiting till 12:30. And also, if I had had more money and more time with the composer, I was trying to do a throwback synth score, and I love it, but some people hated it, and that embarrassed me.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very fond love for film score, for especially electronic music. But I understand why some people don't resonate well with it. I mean, let me introduce you to Petros Silvestros, who's a really talented filmmaker as well. On our end, let me hear from you what. If you have any questions for him, or if you have any thoughts about the film.
The question is, as I said at the beginning, because we had a quick chat about your film with Bernard and Diogo, and what I enjoyed about the film is the production design, which there's something in a good way old-fashioned about it and retro. It reminded me old films that I really like, such as Alien, for instance. And I wanted to ask you, what made you create the spaceship like that? What was the idea of, why did you like to have the spaceship look like this way, and what was the concept behind it?
Yes, we were pretty much locked into that look because that was a standing set at a stage in Los Angeles called Laurel Canyon Studios. And that's just what it looks like. It looks like an Alien ripoff. Right. And I was very lucky. Yeah, you'll see that set in all kinds of low-budget spaceship movies. And the guys there are super nice, but it's like, it looks great on screen, but it's made out of like dishwasher trays and flower pots. And your feet will go right through it.
Yeah, no, there's no limits to how you cheat in filmmaking. Like anything can be anything.
Yeah.
That's basically.
But I got very lucky. I had to have a cinematographer who was a genius.
Right.
And I was also lucky to have a production designer who was very, very good. And so, I was able to be like a real director, and then I was telling them creatively what I wanted, and then they made it happen. Because I had Dan come over, my DP, and I showed him The Empire Strikes Back, and I showed him a little bit of Alien. Can you make it look like this? And he was like, oh yeah. And he figured out how to do it with the practical lights and put some colors in there, So we took what we were locked into physical set and tried to make the best out of it.
Yeah, I mean that was the one thing that sort of came from me is if I had any kind of thing that took me out of the story, because I thought the narrative was while it was a very big narrative, it was doing a lot of things, and as you said, it was part of a feature story, so it makes sense that there were a lot of topics being discussed. I think where the film jolted with me was, you mentioned the score. The score itself wasn't the problem for me. I think where I bumped a couple of times was the score and the visuals not quite lining up. You know, I mean that the visuals were a bit more modern than the score was being. You know, that the film was like Alien and stuff like that, but the score felt older than that and felt more. It felt more, say, like the Tron visuals, or what's it called? The Last Starfighter. You know, it felt, the score felt more that, but the film felt more Alien. You know, and that's where I was like, okay, I wonder which aesthetic he was going for. You know, because one implies the one and one implies the other, and that's I really wanted to find that out from you, which direction you were trying to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't want the composer to hear this and feel terrible because he did what I asked him to do.
Yeah.
And we didn't have money for an orchestra. But, you know, if I had more time, I'd go back in and do probably a little more modern and subdued score.
Right.
And when we make the feature, it will not have that kind of stuff.
Diogo, did you have any questions for Lucas?
Yeah, well, one thing that we all agreed is that we loved your cast, which I think was very
Yeah, the
strong. The
performances were great.
performances was really good. Yeah, they were great. And I would like just to know, in a few words, how did you go about casting those actors?
Well, I'm lucky because I had a casting director. Her name's Christine Sheeks, and she's got some huge credits. She cast Boogie Nights.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
nice.
Yeah, as a
It
friend of mine,
explains why
she
the talent
knows.
is so good.
Yeah, she knows what she's doing, and she's got relationships, and she was able to call some contacts at some agency. They suggested people, and there were no others, and it was cast at the last minute. In fact, I didn't meet Gabor until that morning because somebody else bailed on us, and she saved us.
Okay.
And so she walked in that morning. Hey, nice to meet you. And I was like, nice
That's
to
really
meet you.
impressive. Yeah, no, Petros in his comments earlier mentioned that it's a lot of sci-fi dialogue, which is stuff that we don't normally say, and can be tricky to direct. So
Yeah, it's thank you for your nice words about the casting. I am proud of the casting, and I'm proud of the performances because the casting was just from my imagination, was real, sort of figuring out who embodied the characters and who could convey those archetypes very quickly. And it was very lucky that they did, even though they had just met, that they seemed to have that relationship and a certain chemistry. And Tom Madden had the quality I wanted, where there are aspects of him that are very masculine. Also aspects of him where you could see the little boy in him, and you needed both, because if that character was too mature, if he was weepy for his father, it would be emotional, it would be creepy. If he was like some MMA guy, but because you could sort of see the little kid was still there, you could see the vulnerability. And then the thing I liked about Jess Gabor was that I told her I believe she could actually fix that spaceship.
yeah,
She blue collar reality to her. Jess Gabor really, I mean, she holds a screen in a really unique and just inborn way. I mean, she really has a presence, and she's, you really get a life behind her eyes. And it was something I saw in her reel, and I just needed to see a few seconds of some reel that she was in. I said, oh yeah, get her immediately, please. And she had been acting in Shameless, and she did Shameless on Friday, did our thing on a weekend, and went back to Shameless on Monday.
amazing. So what's next for the film? Like, what are you shooting for now? What are you gonna do?
Guys, I wasn't done talking about how great I am.
Oh, well.
No, I'm sorry. What's next is I'm trying to make the feature, rewrite script, and I'm trying to find a producer and trying to get over of meeting the producer to get the talent and the money to get the talent and the credibility to get the. It's it's a pain in the ass, but
of course.
I had a producer, and then their company broke up when the pandemic happened.
It's just one of those things. Oh gosh. So, how a last question I have for you, and then we have to move on to the next film. What was your budget on it? Do you remember how much you spent on the film?
Yeah, it was.
So yeah, fine. I'll take that answer. All right. Well done.
But,
Congratulations on getting a film
filmmaking.
made. That's the first big step. That's always the hardest part, is actually
Indeed.
pulling it off. And you made a really good short film that was actually very watchable and is popular on YouTube as well. So well done. I appreciate you coming on the
All
call
right.
with us.
Thank all you guys. Watchable is the highest compliment, so I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
That was cool. He's a really nice guy. Clearly, like most of us, so relatable to try and get a movie made, and then pouring a whole bunch of your money into it to get your concept across. And he was clearly ambitious. I mean, there's no question about that. That he tried really hard to get his ideas across. So if you had an advice for him for his next draft, I mean, he said he redrafted the script quite a bit since then. So I'm wondering if you were going to suggest something to him for a next pass. What do you reckon?
I would say to keep it more simple, to remove as much as plot as possible, and keep his storyline very simple. The other thing is that for the same film? For this film?
Yeah, it's for this film, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, I think, from a technical point of view, it would be nice if there's some movement in the spaceship. So we feel that on the move, there wasn't any movement. It felt very static because it's a set, but we can add that.
Yeah, they needed some Star Trekian camera shake
Yeah.
and bodies
Well,
moving along with the gravity.
Yeah. Which is not very difficult. People do it. It could be in a handheld way. It could be in a dolly. You can do it.
But he was directing for the first time, so clearly he was simply missing those little tips and tricks that you just acquire over the years, the little things you can do to know how something's going to cut, you know?
It happens to everyone. You make a film, then you review your own work, you see what's missing, and then you get better.
Exactly.
That's how it always works.
I have to say, my first short film was much worse than that. Yeah, I mean, so like credits due. If you
the one I know was
no.
Well, before
that's no. My first short films was I did when I was 20, and it was terrible. It was god awful. But look, as I shot it with my partner and the guy I met who was like, I can do makeup. All right, great. Well, that's all it was back then. So, and of course it was. I didn't know lighting. It was, you point the camera and that's it. You know, I mean, there's nothing else to it. You know, but look, for a first short film, it's really great. So Diogo, what did you think, like, in terms of his achievement as a first short film?
Yeah, I thought it was really, really great, because it has all the elements of sci-fi that we came to love throughout the years. I agree with you guys. It's very ambitious, and I think we can see there is a feature film behind that. So maybe that's why he bit more than he could chew at the end of the day. But I think the end result was pretty solid, for a first film.
And he seems to admit the same thing, that he's like, look, I know it was my first attempt. I know it has its weaknesses, and he clearly learned a lot from it. And God, I mean, there's nothing like shooting your first film. It's like everything you think suddenly goes, whoa, I didn't know any of this, and you're still learning. I mean, God knows we've been doing it for decades now, and we still don't know. That's the crazy thing, right?
You never know.
Exactly.
Everyone fails. Even big filmmakers, they fail. Even Steven Spielberg fails sometimes.
Absolutely. So Diogo, what's up next? What's the next film we're going to talk about?
Okay, so I have this wonderful film to talk about, which is called In Full Bloom. It's directed by Megan Huang. And it's a very beautiful mixture of sci-fi. Maybe some people would categorize it as a fantasy film that has a lot of drama as well. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this film is that the visual effects included some stop motion animation, and we could really understand it from so many different perspectives, because it can be seen as a metaphor for so many things. For me specifically, it's a metaphor for loss and grief, and it's another film, another one of those short films that we have an interesting, a very strong cast. I really love the protagonist, which is the only human character of the story, and she is really good in it, in my opinion. And at the end of the day, it was one of my favorite films. And this film was actually not submitted to us. I was looking on the internet and on forums and groups, and people constantly mentioned this film. And I went to watch it on Vimeo, and it was there. I was, wow, that is really amazing. And I fell in love with it. So I decided we contacted Megan, and she was kind enough to let us talk about her film here today.
So Petros, tell me what your sort of perspective was on In Full Bloom.
Well, I would say I agree with Diogo. It is a nice film, and the important thing about it is a pure short film. It's been designed to be a short film. It has a very simple concept. It doesn't have an overcomplicated plot. It's a story about grief and loss that's been visualized in a very original way, because she uses the surreal element, two worms that come into her household, and that's original and nice, and you don't need more than that to tell that story. What The only criticism I would have is that it could be a bit shorter. I think it's 10 minutes. I think she can. She has a strong concept and good visuals to tell a story in a much shorter time. So it could easily be probably 6 or 7 minutes. On the other hand, I would say the pace is good. I wasn't bored, but I would say the message would have been much stronger if it was a little bit shorter. And if the visuals as well, they could have been more enhanced in terms of communicating the idea of loss and grief. I would like to see more space in the frame, the visuals, they're more focused on the geography and where the woman is moving. She's moving from left to right now. She's going to bed. I want the shots to have more layers. And talk
so
about
more metaphor in the
more
layer.
metaphors, in the layers to make it even stronger.
I had similar thoughts on that, but I have to sort of put sort of my cultural thumbprint on it and go, there are metaphors and visual metaphors that I probably won't get. You know what I mean? Because this is an Asian film, and it stars an Asian character, and it is. I mean, I feel like there's probably a bunch of stuff culturally speaking which the worms represent, which the plants represent, which the hole itself. I mean, it is a literal wormhole. I found that a very interesting sort of revelation. But there are things that are probably culturally far more sort of presence that I probably wouldn't get, you know. So I have to give the film that benefit of the doubt, simply because that probably would have gone over my head, but may have been more relevant to an Asian audience, you know, if that was the goal. I mean, and I don't necessarily know that. I might be giving too much of the benefit of the doubt here, but to be honest, watching it, I didn't think about any of those things. Because when I was watching it, I was totally with the mystery of it. I was totally with the performance. I really like the leading woman. She's fantastic. I was constantly wondering who sent her that package. Did she order it? Was it sent to her? You know, like I paused on the still trying to read who the sender was, and there's no indication of it. So I have no idea whether this is something she did to herself, or whether this was is this a gift from her, from the person that's passed away and is now being sent to her? Or like, what do these worms, these are things that I was mystified by, but not in a bad way. I was curious, and I was constantly with the mystery about what this means and represents. But thankfully, it wasn't so ambiguous that I had no idea what was going on. You know, like, it didn't overload me with a bunch of information. And I think if I have to give it its biggest compliment, the biggest compliment I can give it, it is the quintessential show don't tell. You know what I mean? Like, it has no dialogue. It entirely trusts in its visuals and its sound design and its production design. It fully trusts that and doesn't give me any explanation to sort of like unnecessary exposition. I think it simply trusts the viewer and its artistry, and I super respect that, and I completely agree with you. It is the perfect short film concept because of that.
Yeah, well, when I first watched it, I was really drawn to it because of the performance and the themes of the movie. But you know, on the second watch, I paid attention to smaller details that I also enjoyed, and I love the setting design with all the crowded plants in the beginning, and the contrast with the end in which everything's empty. I don't want to give a lot of spoilers here, but that contrast was really striking to me. Of course, we already talked about the leading actress here, and I think she deserves a lot of compliment. I would like to see her in more works. I don't know if I have ever seen her before in another films, and I don't even know if she's she looks like a professional actress, but I couldn't tell if I recognize her from somewhere else. But I would love to see her in more films.
Petros, I have a question for you, actually. What do you think was the decision behind going stop motion as opposed to, say, CGI or using real worms for that matter? What do you reckon that decision was?
It adds more charm.
Yeah.
It has more charm. It makes it more. Stop motion's got a bit of imperfection, and that makes it more
surreal,
organic, surreal, comical. Could be more funny. There's something very cold about perfect visual effects.
Yeah.
There's something very sweet, cute about stop motion that comes. It's in contrast with the darkness of the story.
Yeah. I agree.
I
Like
think
it's
that's
because you also don't know in their case what the stop motion represents. I mean, clearly these are not supposed to be real worms. You know what I
no,
mean? They are
yeah.
special kinds of worms, and I think by going stop motion, you immediately buy into that. Like their CG wouldn't let you do that, but I don't know.
It also comes down to what her inspirations are, what she likes in films. For instance, if she's a big David Lynch fan, maybe she was inspired from Eraserhead.
That makes
In
perfect
films
sense.
like this, and
Actually,
this is the stuff she likes, and so she wants to put that in a
you know
film.
what?
You know, all these things, they always influence us when we make a film.
Mm-hmm.
What we liked, what we grew up as filmmakers, and they're very important. When we make a film,
Mm-hmm.
we put that in because that's what influenced us.
Yeah.
That's what made us become filmmakers. So,
I think, I mean, if I had, okay, I'm going to nitpick as the only thing I can really criticize the film for, and that is in the synopsis it says it's about a hoarder, and that's the one thing that didn't really come across to me. I get that she was a loner and she shut herself in and blah blah, but that to me when I think of a hoarder is usually has so much stuff they can't live. And it seemed like she was perfectly capable and perfectly happy to live in that environment with all those things, you know. Well, not happy is the wrong word maybe, but she was comfortable, and in her mourning she was isolating herself from the rest of the world, and she wouldn't have changed a thing. It's only the worms that end up making her change, you know, and accepting that she needs to change, you know. But I didn't get the sense that the fully filled flat was somehow in her way or anything, and that she had to sort of get over that. Like the hoarding didn't really seem what it was about anyway. She's clear. If the place hadn't been full of like junk, and it had just been a normally furnished flat, it would still been a story about loss,
Mm-hmm.
and that she's attached to him, and that losing the house and losing the place and losing her things that remind him of him is the way for her to move forward. It would have made the story just the same, but I'm so nitpicking here. I feel like that's completely unjustified. You know, I'm it didn't matter to me at all while I was watching it, and as I'm literally just pulling this out just to have something to say. Like I would not put this in any kind of, you know, heavy criticism of it. But that's where I'm at.
I would say a thing I would like to add, which is very technical, but it has to do with film language. So that's my favorite aspect
Right.
when it comes to films, film language, the shots you use to tell your story. I love the bit when she puts her slippers on the floor and the camera stays there for a little bit, and that's where you know something's going to happen. There may be an intruder, you know. But what I miss is that when the worms come later that go towards her bed, I would like to see them going through the
Past
shot
slippers.
that we saw before. You know, see the familiar shot, but with the intruder in. Same as later when you see all the belongings she has moved. We have a wide shot of her, and she's scared. She's right at the back of the wall, and then later she walks in the same living room again. It's empty. It's not the same framing. I would have liked to have the same framing because I thought we were in a different place. I wasn't sure we're in the same place, which was packed with objects and all that. I thought we were in a different place. But if the framing was the same, we would have known, no, it's the same space but without all that stuff.
Right.
So little technical things, narrative, important things to tell your story in a more efficient way. I think that's something that would have helped.
So, Diogo, next one. What are we talking about next?
Good. Now I think we should talk about Child Indigo, which is a sci-fi film that talks about kids with superpowers. I think bottom line, this is the idea of the film, but and it's something that we've seen before so many times. And but I think what is different about this short film is that it turns into a more dramatic story very quickly early on. We start seeing these kids trying to run away from some kind of facility, and then we are caught into the background story of that main character, which is a very good actress, by the way. Another one, I think she is very, very delicate in her performance here in this film. And then the story evolves from there. We get a lot of flashbacks, which can be, I don't know, some kind of communication, and I think this is it becomes a more special film. You know, it could have gone wrong or could have been very familiar. and repetitive. And it is in the beginning, but then it turns out to be something quite original, at least to me. And then we get this nice part in which we have a lot of interesting drama.
I have mixed feelings about Child Indigo simply because I really respected the ambition. Like they clearly have big ideas. They really want to tell a big story. They really tried very hard to tell this kind of young adult dystopian environment where kids with superpowers are trapped inside blah blah. But I feel like their ambition got the best of them. And they simply told a story way beyond their resources to do it, and that includes the opening chase scene. That includes the even the script itself just has way more things than it really needs to get the ending basis across. It didn't need all that stuff before it. I know why they did it, but they needed much less of the things that they had. And if they had done less of it, all the resources they would have had, they could have put it into more production design. They could have put it into maybe some fewer characters, to have to focus more on the performances of our leads. I think their ambition just like went a bit too far, and suddenly the film that they had. And again, I super respect anybody who tries to make a film and actually gets there, even if it's not successful. But I feel like simplification would have really served the story well.
Absolutely, I thought exactly the same. In fact, I would say that I found it very hard to follow it and get involved and understand it, because again, there was so much thrown at me at the same time. A mother, a child, they seem to be trapped in an alternative reality.
And then there's a sister, and
there's a sister. Too many characters. But there's a battle. You don't understand who are they battling. And then the problem is, as I said, with the previous science fiction film we discussed, there's a lot to tell the audience, to tell them how this world works. And then you have to tell them about the story as well. And you only have 15 minutes. So you don't have the time. And then the filmmaker, because there's so much he has to explain, he finds refuge in dialogue. And you end up with a lot of exposition in dialogue.
They didn't need it. That's the thing. It's like if they had simply...
Yeah, and you end up with dialogue such as, we're all trapped, this isn't even fair, we can stop them, we can break free, simulated realities are nothing to us, which basically over-explains what the film is trying to do, and that's what you have to avoid when you make a film. But that's what happens when you have too much to tell in 15 minutes, and it gets convoluted and complicated, and then you fail to communicate your audience your story.
Yeah.
Again, like you, appreciate the ambition. There's so much going on there,
and lots of big ideas. I mean, it's like clearly, it's because you've got a virtual world, you've got a prison. They clearly they think these kids are dangerous. There's a lot of good ideas in there, but because they threw all of them in, they didn't get to explore any of them really well. And I feel like if they had simply focused in on one of them and said, okay, let's tell this person's story and only tell this person's story, and not also add all these other characters and stuff like that, and it made it harder to follow. And I wish they had simply made a clearer choice as to what to focus on and use the resources that they had to more effect on the smaller thing, and then the production design could have been better, the cinematography could have been better, they would have needed less time to film, like everything. You have just a bit more focus would have given you more resources to do more things. At least that's how I felt watching it.
Absolutely. The filmmaking is always a lot of hard work. When you don't want to add to it more logistical nightmare, finding all these props, be able to light all these people in an efficient way so it looks like a sci-fi. That's a lot to do. At the same time, you have to tell your story.
Exactly.
You have to keep it simple.
Yeah. Diogo, do you have any more thoughts on it?
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking about watching it a second time, it felt pretty much like a TV pilot to me. Like they throw a lot of information, and I agree with you guys. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of characters, and it gets confusing. But if you see it from another perspective, maybe it could have, of course, if they had this in mind, like a bigger story, as they do. When we think about the conclusion of the story at the last seconds, it's very clear to me that they want to tell more, right? But of course, budget and resources and everything makes it more difficult. I agree with you. It could have been optimized, but I felt this TV pilot atmosphere while I was watching it, and maybe a second and a third episode could have made it more interesting and complete.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, one more thing I want to add is talk about music, and
Right.
that's something that put me off a little bit. I found it at times a bit melodramatic.
Right. That the music was a bit much.
Was a bit much melodramatic.
Right. But you have a strong music background, right? So that's where you didn't you start in music before you were in.
I wanted to be a composer.
Right.
I was listening a lot to John Williams and Danny Elfman, and
Right.
initially I wanted to be a film composer, but that made me wanted to learn more about films,
Right.
and then I decided I want to be a film director. But originally I was drawn to film because of soundtracks.
Right. Okay. Well, but I see. I can see now because we had a similar discussion about the score in Skyfighter as well. That you felt you struggled with the score versus the film, and
That's right, and music is something very difficult when you lay it on a film. I mean, I like classical music. When if I put I don't like synthesized electronic music very much.
I love synthesizing. like for me, that's
I like, but what I don't like is when electronic music is trying to imitate an orchestra,
Right.
and that's what I tried to do here a few times, and it comes across a little bit cheap, which
Right.
is not great.
Mhm.
So yeah, if it's strictly electronic music, it could work, it could be very nice. But when you're trying to do orchestral music, the best thing is to try and have the real thing.
Yeah,
Which
or
is
at least-
expensive,
or,
I
or at
understand.
least. I mean, I've met some great composers that can do a really good job simulating an orchestra, simulating a classical score without needing to record live instruments. I've heard some amazing stuff.
It is possible, and we've seen it many times, and big composers like Hans Zimmer, they manage to do that. But you have to know what you're doing with the
You
equipment
really have to know what
be
you're
able
doing.
to
Absolutely, there's no question. If I have to say what my favorite thing about this film was the moment when she's talking to the young version of her sister, or is it, I'm not sure if it was a sister, like it's when they're in the bedroom and it's just her and the little girl, and the little girl was amazing. Like she was actually really good. She was probably the most natural performance out of all of them, because I think she had the most fun. You could tell she had a lot of fun playing the little bits, and if she didn't have a lot of fun, I'm sorry I said that, but certainly the chemistry between the lead and her was great, and that's where the mystery really came in. If they had gotten rid of all the stuff before it, and you only had her waking up in her bedroom and talking to this little girl, and you wonder what this is, nothing is quite right, everything is a bit off, and then suddenly the reveal is that she's stuck in a prison and she's a child with power and they're trying to hold her back, that would have at least worked better. And if the rest of the story would have been just her trying to break out, I would have been completely fine with that. We didn't need all the other stuff before it. And as I said, that would have been a more intimate setting. It would have been a two-hander, and we didn't need any of the other stuff. In fact, edit-wise, if it had been that, and then she somehow psychologically manages to break out and simply runs out, and then she runs out onto the train tracks where all the others are, runs onto the train tracks and is chased by a bunch of security guards, and then she uses her superpower to basically depart, then we know, and that's all the film really needed to be, It's simply about that. And edit could have done that, with something they already had. So I don't want to change your movie, but I do think that the simplification of it could have made for a more suspenseful and a more dramatic story, and could have focused on what I think was the best part, which was that two-hander in the bedroom. All right, last film.
Okay. So now let's talk about 100 Kills, which is a short that was sent to us by Austin Matheson. It's not a sci-fi film per se.
The graphics, mobile phone.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely has some sci-fi elements in it, and it's had some definite ambitions, but it's a more grounded sci-fi rather than sort of like the Skyfighter classic sci-fi.
And the elements, that's one of the reasons I chose it, because it uses the sci-fi elements, but I'm not sure it uses in the best possible ways. And that's one of the things I wanted to discuss with you guys. I think it's an interesting premise. Again, it's not something completely new and original. We've seen this before. It's an assassin that it's tired of always doing the same job and wants to retire from this I don't know, ungrateful profession. And throughout the short, we're seeing him fighting against his obligations. And once in a while, we see some sci-fi elements there, usually in the visuals, that I think they were okay, but I felt a little bit conflicted about why they used so much. Unfortunately, we don't have Austin here to get some answers, but I think it's interesting for us to discuss and see um, how it could have been maybe a little bit, how could have been improved a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the film is clearly made by one person, maybe two people. So there's clearly two people that just wanted to make a film. They have ambitions to make films. It's even possible, and I'm highly theorizing here. I don't know how true this is, but that one of them is a visual effects, motion graphics animator, because the motion graphics are really good. You know, I mean, they did a really good job making those. And so clearly either somebody was paid to do those, or they know how to do that, but they've never really filmed anything practically. And so where the film's strengths are is in that part, but struggled with the visuals and the practical side of it. But I don't know, so I'm hypothesizing here. I honestly don't know that. However, I think when I mentioned earlier, Show Don't Tell was the strongest part of that film. This film was pretty much its weakest part, is that it didn't really show us enough and tried to tell us everything. And unfortunately, because the recording quality of the voiceover, which explained everything, wasn't particularly good either, I struggled to understand a lot of the things that I was being told. So I constantly had to double check what was just being said. I would have spent more time trying to figure out what the filmmaking is than I could to the story itself, and that took me out of the movie and unfortunately ruined the potential enjoyment I could have had if I'd been able to stay in the movie had the sound quality been better. And this is one thing a lot of new filmmakers completely forget. Sound quality is essential. It is completely unforgiving. I mean, you can get away with weak visuals, you can get away with, maybe not the best score, but you can't have bad sound. Like, if the dialogue is not understandable, if the atmosphere sounds bad, it can take the viewer out so quickly. That's really where I struggled the most.
I agree with you. What I would like to add is that, because we were talking before what makes a good short film and where a short film can fail, and what's a good thing about it, it's simple. It's not convoluted. It doesn't have too much plot, too much things to explain. It's a story that suits this medium. It's a very suitable story for a short film, to make a short film. And it's driven by a voiceover, which is, I think, it's a very, very good device for a short film.
Yeah.
So everything's good. I agree with you and Diogo. What lets it down, it's the level of his production, basically. Cinematography, sound design, music. Directing, again, is very generic. It's not dramatic. It doesn't push the emotions, doesn't push the suspense. All sizes of shots are used for every occasion, everywhere. It's not focused, and that's the problem with it. Another thing is casting. I think the guy they cast, it seems he's a fine actor, but I think he looks a bit too eccentric to play an assassin. He should look a bit more invisible, more neutral to play that part, I think.
Unless his whole thing is being a bum, or something that's somebody who plays in more eccentric circles. So if he's more of a person who maybe, like me, likes the heavy metal circuit or something like so that's where he operates. Okay, fine. It's a casting of assassins too, then, but we didn't get that didn't come across.
Possibly, but there's something about it, because we've seen contract killers and assassins from so many times, and usually they have a very neutral look.
Unless you're Matt Damon, or James Bond.
Usually, we're thinking about Day of the Jackal, for instance. They have a neutral look. They have to be invisible. They shouldn't draw any attention. And with the beard and the style he has, he draws a lot of attention, and that's something we're not used to see when we watch films about contract killers.
I think it definitely. I don't know if this is a first film for this director or not. It's entirely possible it's a first film. Certainly, There's a few sort of telltale signs that this is a filmmaker who's not made films before. But I think, but if there have been films before, I think some more important lessons need to be learned. And I think a couple of things that are really important is you can actually do quite a lot with simple film language that you don't need a lot of equipment for. So for example, if you understand cinematic language and editing quite a bit, you can do a lot with the phone. And I mean, the iPhone is fantastic for this stuff nowadays. And so if you simply take the visual languages that you can learn with a phone and simply apply those, you can do a lot with that. And I think that's what the next step for this filmmaker should be, is tell a simpler story, maybe even, something that's just set inside a flat, but how can you explore the visual language inside an apartment? So where you have wide shots and extreme close-ups and pans and tilts and pull focuses and all those things you can do nowadays with an iPhone, And I think that's what this director really wasn't exploring, was all the tools that filmmaking can give you. They haven't really been explored, and I think it's mostly because of inexperience. I think that's where
I absolutely agree with you. And you can sometimes, even with the film language, if you have a strong film language, you can easily cover the problems you have with production, the lack of money and all that, which is a problem when you start as a filmmaker. For instance, this could have been directed all in one shot, handheld with a phone, and he could have gone deeper into the character with a voiceover. Could have been done that way. He didn't need all these different shots.
Or all this interface.
So if you have a distinctive film language, you don't really need money. If the story is very simple and you don't need huge sets and all that, you can do miracles with nothing.
I've seen some incredible stuff that's shot with absolutely nothing. And so I think if we're going to start with, and sci-fi is an unfair genre to do this with, because sci-fi by its very nature tends to be a complex genre. You're usually trying to world build, you're usually trying to character, and stuff like that. So to simplify a sci-fi premise is hard. It's not an easy thing to do.
There's very good examples, such as Darren Aronofsky's Pi, for instance, which is all done in a room. Eraserhead, for instance.
It's a great example.
Right.
Since we mentioned David Lynch earlier.
Right. We can do things. I call them lo-fi sci-fi. That's how usually they call them.
But it's not easy. You have to really know the subject. You have to really know how to write these things, and
it comes down. One thing is script. The other thing is film language. If you have a strong voice, a distinctive voice, you can create atmosphere from nothing. You don't need spaceships, visual effects, and all that.
Plus, Darren Aronofsky knows how to use drum and bass in a soundtrack. And that's,
Clint Mansell, right?
Electronic music nerd here. I absolutely love that score. So, where are you standing? Do you have anything else you'd like to add to 100 Kills?
Well, I think I agree with you guys on the editing here. I think that the cuts were very dry, very abrupt, and then at the end it felt a little bit rushed. I don't know if maybe the filmmaker tried to do everything in a short period of time, but it felt a little bit, it could have been more sophisticated. I think this is my point here.
I completely agree. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on the show. Thank you, Diogo, for putting this together. And Diogo, why don't you tell us what's up next for our episode 2?
Yeah, we'll be talking about more short films, and now we're going to switch genres. We're going to talk about horror films, which are, one of my favorite genres in the history of cinema.
Awesome. I can't wait to discuss that. And our next guest will be Luke Foster, who is a collaborator of mine. He's a fantastic writer. We did a horror film together, so I can't wait to discuss these films. Well, thank you very much for joining this episode. Thank you, Petros, for joining. Thank you, Diogo, for putting everything together. And be sure to go to CenterFrame.com to sign up to our mailing list and to join us on our social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever we are. Please go there, join the conversation. I would love to hear from you. If you have any suggestions for films, please send them to us. Go to CenterFrame.com/makeitshort, and there you can submit films, and we'd love to hear from you. And we're going to do this more often because I love the format, and it was great to also have the filmmakers present so we can hear from them what they were doing. So I really, really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.